When it comes to All or Nothing, I was approached by Charles last semester. He needed some information as far as maybe some background on the slaves that had escaped, some of the background on the area, the period that the escape took place. I did a lot of research for him, as far as finding period information on clothing, period information on weaponry, that type of thing. I think that the fact that he's doing a film dealing with this small incident, which was very large for the people that were involved, the slaves that escaped, and also the people that helped them move into Ann Arbor and then eventually into Canada. It's important that these be brought to light, and film is a very good way of doing that. There are many films that have been done on African American history. You have Glory, you have Amistad, you have a lot of films that make an impact on people, and I think it's important for people to have that dramatic impact, for it to maybe show them how things might have been, how things could be, that type of thing.
I'm John Fierst, and I'm the librarian at the Clark Historical Library. I've been here for about 10 years. I was originally hired because of my background. I have a strong interest in the antebellum period of American history, and the Clark has a very strong collection in the antebellum period, Michigan territorial history. I kind of straddle both worlds as a librarian and as a historian. And as an historian, I feel strongly about that period I just described. But as a librarian, I also have a really strong sense of documents and the importance of documents and the importance of reading documents. This film, All or Nothing, is a fictional film, but what's wonderful about it is that it's based on actual documents. And what documents can do, they can't necessarily tell you what happened, but in many ways they tell you what didn't happen. So they kind of set the boundaries for you. And if you're doing a film like this, an historical film like this, you need to consult the documents, which is what's going to make this such a good film.
My name is Frank Bowles. I'm the director of the Clark Historical Library at Central Michigan University. I've been the director here since 1991, and the Clark Library is responsible primarily for documenting the history of Michigan. So we have a very extensive collection of material regarding our state. We're very excited about the prospect of a film being made documenting the passage of enslaved people before the Civil War from the South through Ohio primarily, and then into Michigan and on into Canada. The Underground Railroad is one of those challenging things to document because by its very nature it was secret. People didn't put up a sign on their house and say, "This is the stop of the Underground Railroad, spend the day and we'll move you on tomorrow." There was a very good reason to keep it secret, and the people who engaged in the Underground Railroad, the people who assisted the enslaved people, were at some risk. They were breaking the law, as the law was understood in the 1850s. Their actions were courageous. They were based on usually very firm and strong moral beliefs. Many of them had deeply held religious beliefs on the subject and believed that slavery was simply wrong. It's a fascinating, important, and wonderful story to share.
My name is George Ross. I'm the president of Central Michigan University. We have a great burden on ourselves as parents, and I've lived that as a father of a daughter. She's an adult now, but part of her upbringing was being taught about who she is as a black girl and now woman in America. My wife and I made a conscious choice as to what school she would attend. And I have to tell you a story about a great school in Detroit named Nataki Taliba. I remember going to Mrs. Nanamdi when my wife and I were shopping schools for our daughter, and she had a session of parents there, and they were asking questions about the school and the curriculum. And she went up to a blackboard, and she wrote out a sentence that says, "Germans are from," with a line to fill it in. "Frenchmen are from," with a line to fill it in. "Black people are from," with a line to fill it in. And Germans are from Germany and Frenchmen are from France. Where are black people from? That resonated with me because our identity has been lost coming to this country as slaves and taking on names of owners. I wanted my daughter to know who she was and part of that heritage, and we tried to instill that in her. She's an American first, but there's a heritage behind that, and I think that's good for all of our children to know.
My name is Carol E. Mull, and I am a researcher and writer about Underground Railroad history, anti-slavery history in the state of Michigan. I wrote the book, The Underground Railroad in Michigan, which was published by McFarland Publishers in 2010, and other articles and a chapter for another book. I felt firmly that this was a story that needed to be told, that had not been told, and the more I researched, the more I learned about the participants and the amazing events that had happened to help end slavery, and felt that it had to be published in full form, which meant an entire book, and fortunately it was published.
My name is Dr. Eric Jackson. I'm an associate professor of history at Northern Kentucky University. I'm also the director of our Black World Studies program here. The issue of race is people in power can impose concepts of race on different types of groups, meaning people at the top who have money and power can define for folks who are different race or who are called the others, their status in society. How have African Americans been impacted by the access to or the lack of access to formal education? And so for African Americans or people of color, defining the term in general, education has also always been the key for change or liberation or even empowerment. And when the country started back in the colonial period, African Americans legally were not allowed to learn how to read and write. But you had outlier folks, people like Frederick Douglass, when he writes in his narratives that freedom came to him, abolition came to him when he learned to teach himself how to read and write. And so for African Americans, the key to their own liberation is to teach themselves how to read and write. And so the key in that particular piece is to understand you must make education a parental family journey. It's not an individual journey, because if you don't have a collective behind you as an African American, you're going to learn how to just go along to get along. You're not learning to empower or liberate yourself through your culture, through your music, through your arts. You're not learning about yourself. And that's the part that's missing about formal education. People of color are not learning about their own culture to empower themselves through the educational process. They're just becoming part of a system where they're being shoved through a system or held back or moved into a criminal justice system because of the lack of education. Understanding one's history and the importance of understanding is to understand where you've come from, where you are, and where you're going. Or as I use the three concepts, number one is contradiction. History is full of contradiction. Just using the American experience, Thomas Jefferson writes the Declaration of Independence in 1775, all men are created equal, endowed by certain rights, among those of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But we know it didn't apply to black folks, didn't apply to Native Americans, didn't apply to women, didn't apply to poor people. So the contradiction is you have a country talking about liberty, equality, and democracy, but 2/3 of the country it didn't apply to. So if you're an African American or a person who's dispossessed, you have to understand that historical contradiction. From the beginning, the country is a contradiction. For another way of putting it, the country is claiming to be a free nation, but it's built on enslavement. That huge contradiction parallels how this country starts to march. So the first thing you have to understand is contradiction. Second thing you have to understand is struggle. You're gonna have to struggle. The people who came before you struggled. You're gonna struggle. Hopefully the struggle lessens over time, but you understand that struggle through history. Understand history from a struggle standpoint. Different people get to where they want to go, not by happenstance. They get there because they have to struggle. It's just a part of your culture. And most powerfully, and the last point is perseverance. You've got to figure out how to persevere. You don't have a choice. Your role in life, learning history, is you have to make the situation better for that next generation. And you know that historically. This country has moved, not to say it's perfect, don't even know what perfect means, but it's changing in a positive direction because people have understood you've got to persevere, because that next generation, they have to have a better life. And you learn that through history. From the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, even with the urban unrest, whatever term you want to use, understand there's a history behind that, and it's better today for most people than it was before.